Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to thank everyone for attending today's webinar for Rail Safety Week. We are really excited to partner with Operation Lifesaver here in South Carolina and Janice to bring more awareness to rail safety in South Carolina and what we can be doing to be more safe around tracks. We are the Office of Regulatory Staff, and we have a role and play a role in rail safety here in the state. And I have with us today Tom Allen, who's going to talk a little bit about what we do for rail safety in South Carolina. Then we will transition to Janice, who is going to talk about Operation Lifesaver. And at the end, we have a special story that we'd like to share with you all. So first want to do a little bit of housekeeping. As all folks are probably familiar with the Zoom platform by now, but you do have the ribbon that will show you the different options. This is the webinar format, so it may be a little bit different than what you're used to, but there is a chat function and a Q&A. So if you have questions, you can put those in either of those. We'll see them throughout the presentation. And then if we don't get to them during the presentation live, then we will answer them at the end. So feel free to put any questions in there. And then also just make sure everyone should have entered on mute and should stay on mute. But if for some reason you have to unmute to ask a question, you can't put that in the chat, just press the little raise your hand button and we can do that. This webinar is being recorded, so a recording of it will be available after we complete the webinar. We'll send out that as well as the slides. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Allen, who is going to kick off the webinar for Rail Safety Week.
Thank you, Landon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Rail Safety Week. We know that this is such an important time of the year to remind everyone to be safe around tracks and around railroads. Just to share a quick story with you, obviously we deal with rail safety regulation, and I'm very tied to the South Carolina Emergency Management Division. And the Emergency Management Division is notified of any and all rail accidents. And right now, as of about a week ago, 95% of all the rail accidents and incidents that they receive notification of are incidents that occur at highway grade crossings. So just a little mindful, I know we'll get into that with Operation Lifesaver, how important it is to make sure you're very aware around railroad crossings and all railroad tracks. But we'll get into our presentation. I'll let you know what we do, take about 5 or 10 minutes. And then we'll turn it over to Operation Lifesaver. Our job as utility regulators from a railroad perspective is to ensure that the railroads are operating safely so that they can reduce the risk of accidents and incidents, and of course, injuries and fatalities. And we enter into a partnership agreement with the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, to enforce federal rules and regulations. Now, we'll share with you our #1 priority is the oversight of rail employees and their equipment. But the second and third order effects of the regulatory compliance is that public safety is maintained. In South Carolina, we've got about 2,600 miles of track each year, and our next slide shows you where those are located. Landon, if you'll advance. You can see this map is just a little dated. Some of the names of the railroads have been changed, but in general, you see that in red, those are your main lines composed primarily of CSX and Norfolk Southern railways. And you'll see little green, those are short line railroads, and short line railroads are usually dedicated to a particular industry or to a particular amount or tonnage of goods. In fact, the Federal Railroad Administration classifies class 1s versus the short lines based on the amount of tonnage that they move each year. So you can see that the railroads not only are located in rural areas, but also run through the urban areas as well. Landon, you can advance here, please. Thank you. All right, now in South Carolina, we've got 2 railroad inspectors for 2,600 miles of track. The FRA classifies the types of inspections done in 5 different categories: track, operating practices, signal and train control, hazardous materials, and motive power and equipment. In South Carolina, we have 2 specialized inspectors. One is track, and he does exactly what you think he does. He travels the track each and every day in a high rail, which is basically a truck that runs along the railroads, and he inspects for any flaws and defects in the track or the ballast or the bedding, rail bed that may occur. Our operating practices inspector really looks at the human factor. He ensures that the railroad is not only following the rules and regulations, but also following their own procedures, particularly regarding setting of brakes, radio communications. And then 3 disciplines that we do not have in South Carolina are signal and train control. Those look at the the signals along the track. The hazmat, those are usually dealing with the tank cars that you see. And motive power and equipment, that deals with the actual locomotive and the physical condition of the rail cars. Next slide, please, Landon. All right, and last year in South Carolina, our 2 inspectors over 2,600 miles of track, they conducted 230 routine inspections. And with those inspections, they did about 89 inspection reports. In other words, some of these inspections are multi-day affairs. So they'll get an inspection report for every 2 or 3 day inspection. We found 21 safety violations and 572 defects. Now, each of those, both the violations and the defects, the railroads are always formally notified of those things, but the safety violations, the railroads are actually fined, typically anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000. We've seen fines as high as $25,000 by the Federal Railroad Administration. And for the defects, they're required to correct those defects within a certain time frame, and it depends on the type of defect, how long they get. So those are always corrected as well, and our inspectors go back and follow up to make sure those defects have always been corrected. Now, what do our inspectors do besides actually inspect the rail and make sure that the railroad employees are safe? Well, they also train in accident investigation, because we do occasionally have accidents in South Carolina. They also once a year go through what's called recurrency training. They travel to Colorado, Pueblo, Colorado, at the Federal Railroad Administration training facility, and they actually hone their skills not only in accident investigation, but also in their particular inspector discipline. We also, they as well as I, track and monitor any regulations both at the state and the federal level that may change how the railroads operate. We look for trends in the rail industry. I'll give you a good example of that. About 5 or 6 years ago, the industry started instituting something that's called precision railroading. And basically what that means is they started building their trains longer and longer and longer. So if you know that, if you've noticed that you've been at a crossing that's blocked, a lot longer than it seemed like 5 or 10 years ago, you're probably right. And then of course we coordinate with the Federal Railroad Administration, both their track and the federal OP guys, in inspection coordination, but also we make referrals anytime that there's an issue at a highway rail grade crossing. Next slide, please. Just give you a look at some of the incidents that occurred in South Carolina. This, of course, as you can see by the graph, was 2015 through 2019. That's the most complete data that we have. The data for 2020 is not complete yet, and the reason is because sometimes the FRA will change the type of category that a particular incident fits into. But if you look right there in the middle, highway rail incident, typically the largest category. Okay, we've got train accidents. Those are when you have a train on train, or if you have a train with a car. Those usually happen in a yard, in a rail yard. The other incidents can be anything else in which someone may have been harmed or injured. And then of course you see our fatalities. They're up and down. Those fatalities can occur actually on the railroad or at a grade crossing. We have had some major incidents in South Carolina that ORS has investigated. In 2020, we investigated 119 rail-related incidents. In the past, we've had three major freight incidents in Martin, which is in Allendale County, Trenton and Edgefield, and North Charleston, in which we spent weeks investigating. And then, of course, many of you are aware of the Amtrak incident in Casey that occurred in 2018 that killed the engineer and the conductor of the Amtrak locomotive, as well as injured well over 100 people. Next slide, Landon. Thank you. But there's some other things that we do at ORS besides just actually actively inspecting the railroads. We also issue rail safety advisories to first responder. I'll give you an example. After an incident in 2013, we had many responders. It was a hazmat related incident, and we had first responders arrive on scene and go straight to the rail car. Well, understanding that they want to make sure everybody's okay, but this was a hazmat involved incident in which they didn't know what the fumes were coming out, and we had some folks injured. So we'll issue rail safety advisories about how to properly access a manifest of the items that might be on a train, so that they'll better be prepared to respond to those. We've provided block crossing advisories. That's our largest complaint that we get at our agency regards block crossings. So we have taken time to talk to law enforcement and advise them of how they are to do this. In South Carolina, it is actually there is a civil penalty for blocking a railroad crossing for more than 5 minutes. Unfortunately, the fine for it is only as low as $5 and as high as $20. So typically you don't see a lot of law enforcement officers writing tickets because the penalty is just not severe enough. We also advise local emergency preparedness committees, LEPCs. Those are organizations that are required by each county or groups of counties by the Department of Homeland Security, the federal agency. And so we advise them on how they can best be prepared to respond to rail-related incidents. And of course, we provide tools to state and county emergency managers. There's several apps that if we had a little bit more time, I can certainly show you. But these apps assist responders in finding out what in particular might be on a train if they have to respond. We also participate in emergency drills. Not too long ago, right before COVID, we actually had conducted and participated in a drill at Riverbank Zoo here in Columbia, in which we simulated a train accident in front of the zoo and had to actually evacuate all of the folks from the zoo. And the last bullet point actually stemmed from the Amtrak incident in 2018. We realized that many of the 911 operators in South Carolina didn't have the railroad milepost in their CAD system. So if their responders have to go to the scene of a rail incident, they may not have good, accurate GIS type location to be able to get there. And so we've worked hard to make sure that most, not all, but most 911 operators are able to have that GIS information incorporated into their computer-aided dispatch system. And then two things that we've done recently, Landon, if you'll continue on there. We work with and advise the DMV on their driver manuals. We help them find charts and graphs and things like that to better educate new drivers regarding rail safety. And then, of course, and you see a picture there of our OP Inspector Greg Butler, works cooperatively with Operation Lifesaver to spread the safety message. Now, each year we are actually required to produce a report to the General Assembly in which we're to make recommendations regarding rail operations in South Carolina. And the past 2 years, we've made the same 3 recommendations. Number one, we've recommended that the penalty for block crossings increase. We know that when these crossings are blocked, they can hinder emergency response, they can slow commerce, and they create a dangerous situation for pedestrians. A good example is right down here, not too far from me, around USC. Oftentimes, Assembly Street will be blocked, and you can see those students crossing those tracks and crossing those trains. Just not a good situation to be in. Of course, trespassing. We've seen an increase in fatalities and injuries in 3 of the last 5 years in South Carolina. And then, and so we have recommended to the state legislature that those fines would be increased. And of course, we oftentimes see motorists that disregard crossing arms and crossbucks and signals and stop signs at grade crossing, and we've recommended that those fines increase as well. And with that in mind, went a little longer than I thought I would. Landon, if you don't mind advancing to the last slide again. I'm Tom Allen. I'm the Chief of Broadband Communications and Safety. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be looking in the chat box. Or of course, certainly feel free to shoot me an email or give us a call here at the agency, and we'll be happy to assist. So with that in mind, I'll pause and turn it back over to Landon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. It's oftentimes, hard for folks to understand that, we regulate utilities with electric utilities and then transportation and water and pipeline safety. We also do railroad safety. So, it's good that we're being able to highlight that as part of our programs and resources here through our agency. And with that, we're trying to transitioning to our Rail Safety Week presenter here, Janice, with Operation Lifesaver, South Carolina. And I'm just going to transition it over to her, and we're going to transition our slides really quickly. So bear with us while we do that.
Well, didn't quite catch. Hold on one second. Sorry. There it is. There. Can you see that? In the interest of safety. Okay, great. Well, yeah, I am Janice Cowan. I'm the state coordinator for South Carolina Operation Lifesaver. And it is our mission to share railroad safety to the public, both for vehicular safety as well as for trespassing safety. Walking on the railroad tracks, if it's at another location other than at a crossing or a sidewalk, is trespassing. And we certainly do want to remind people of that. And of course, crossing those tracks in your vehicle, doing that as safely as possible as well. This week is Rail Safety Week. It started on Monday, so it runs from September 20th through the 26th. Our mission and goal for Rail Safety Week is to share railroad safety tips to the public to help them empower themselves to stay safe when they cross railroad tracks. Our logo and trademark for Rail Safety Week is Stop Track Tragedies. So if we're working together and we're trying to share railroad safety information across the state, across the nation, and actually all across North America, Rail Safety Week is going to make a difference, and we hope together we can stop those track tragedies from happening. So we do have a governor's proclamation for this week. And the week has been divided out daily by different audience types. We started out the week in Charleston, and we did media interviews with our partner, the South Carolina Highway Patrol. We also launched our social media campaign. On Tuesday, we focused on law enforcement, a North American law enforcement focus day where we had law enforcement agencies all across North America at crossings, reminding the citizens in their jurisdiction to use caution when they cross those railroad tracks and make sure that they always look and listen for a train and always expect a train when they come up to those crossings. Today, Wednesday, we are focusing on the emergency notification system sign that is at crossings. So in case there is an emergency, and I'll show you a little bit later what to do in those cases, but we want the public to be aware of that sign so they know that they can, in case of an emergency, call the 1-800 number posted at the crossing and hopefully stop a train so there is not a tragedy at the crossing. Thursday, tomorrow, we'll be focusing on professional truck drivers and professional bus drivers, making sure that they know the proper procedures when they come up to the crossing, and of course, what to do in case of an emergency. Friday, we have what's called Red Out for Rail Safety. So we hope you guys will join us and wear red. I'll post some pictures on social media with the hashtag Red Out for Rail Safety so that we can share those. just trying to promote some good feeling social media out there about stopping these track tragedies from happening. Saturday, we focus on trespassing, and so we do work with colleges and universities, trying to share that information to those who have tracks near them. Of course, USC here in Columbia, there are tracks all around it and through it. So we work heavily with the University of South Carolina Police, as well as other law enforcement agencies from colleges and universities. And we also work to share outdoor enthusiast information, reminding people to be careful when they're going to and from their favorite fishing or hunting spot, not to use the tracks as a shortcut to those locations. And if they're pulling a camper or a boat or some type of trailer behind them to go to their recreation location, we just remind them rails and recreation do not mix. You don't want to be out on those tracks if a train is coming through. So when you're pulling those vehicles with a trailer behind it, just remember when you go over the tracks, you have to clear the track on the other side with your vehicle, but also with any trailer that you are carrying. I'll show you a little bit more about our campaign that we're running in a few minutes. And then we have Sunday is no photography on railroad tracks. Unfortunately, there's been a trend lately where we have seen a good number of people, amateurs, selfies, as well as professionals taking photos out on the railroad track. It's just not a safe place to be. It's trespassing, but really more importantly, of course, it is very, very dangerous, and we don't want people out there taking those pictures on the railroad. So I want to talk a little bit about the tips that we do share with the public. First, of course, this is what we're trying to prevent from happening. And this is a lightweight Amtrak. Most of the incidents we do have in our state and across the United States deal with freight trains. But as you can see, this was a lighter weight Amtrak, but it did substantial damage to that vehicle. And I always ask when I show this slide, what is missing in this particular crash photo that you normally see in a car-to-car crash photo? And if you think on that for just a second, the answer is the roadway. Where did this incident happen? And the lightweight Amtrak train pushed this car such a long distance, you can't even see where the roadway is in the background. So this is the type of force we're talking about. This is the weight that these trains have. And we're trying to share the information to the public so that they don't get themselves in a situation where there may be a train coming when they cross those tracks. Every 3 hours in the United States, a person or a vehicle is hit by a train. That is a high number, and we're doing what we can and partnering with wonderful people like the Highway Patrol, DPS, DOT, our Department of Education, you guys. So many different partners help us share our information, trying to get this number down. So this is the statistics for South Carolina. You can see in 1977, we had 290 crashes in the state of South Carolina alone. Talk started happening. We got to do something about this. The next year we had 260. And then South Carolina Operation Lifesaver began in 1979. And we are very thrilled to see that the numbers have steadily gone down. They are kind of in a stagnant time right now. We've been in the 40s and 50s for a few years. If you notice that in 2019, we had 60 crashes. The preliminary reports from the FRA for 2020 show only 32 crashes in the state of South Carolina. Of course, we feel that the pandemic had something to do with that, people staying home, not going to work or out to other activities. Unfortunately, preliminary reports from the FRA through June 30th of this year, we already have 28. We had 32 in 2020, and then 28 already through half the year. So we have work yet to do. And this is a view of our region. FRA does have the nation divided up in regions, and I believe that's currently in transition, but the region that we had encompassed the states you see on the screen at the moment. We are a smaller state, but we have a lot of railroad tracks and a lot of crossings in our state. So we do have quite a number of incidents happening each year. So how do we prevent this from happening? By sharing this information, of course. Anytime is train time. Trains don't run on schedules. I know a lot of people would like them to, but they don't. They are 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. And I remind people, especially here in Columbia during fall football season, the trains don't stop on game day. They operate that day just like they do other days. So we need to be mindful of them. We need to make sure that we're not walking on those tracks to the game. We don't want to be tailgating near the tracks as well. We want to stay away from the tracks to give those trains room to pass through. This is another what is missing question, similar to the one with the crossing and where was the roadway. Of course, what is missing inside of this locomotive engine, and that's the steering wheel. There is not a steering wheel, so trains cannot swerve. They can't go left, they cannot go right to avoid something that's in front of them. So we remind people that it's in their hands as drivers, motorists, pedestrians, cyclists, to make sure that they stay out of the path of the train. And trains cannot stop quickly. As you know, they're pretty large and pretty heavy. So your average car will stop in about 200 feet, and a bus in about 230, a tractor trailer about 300 feet, which is the distance, since we're talking football, of one football field. Commuter trains, about 2 football fields or 600 feet. But your average freight train, the ones that we do see the most here in South Carolina, can take 5,280 feet or more, which is 1 mile or the equivalent of 18 football fields. And if you can envision 18 football fields back to back to back, that's quite a long distance. And the train crew would not even realize there was something on the track ahead of them that mile away. So we really do need to make sure that it's up to us, as I said, drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists, making sure that we approach crossings looking for a train, listening for the train whistle, and never try to beat the train if you see or hear one approaching. So why do trains take so long to stop? Of course, it's physics. Something that's heavier takes a longer distance to stop. So we talk about the weight ratio of 4,000 to 1. You have a 12 million pound train against a 3,000 pound car. And that's the same weight ratio as the 3,000 pound car is to a 12-ounce soda can. And we certainly know the impact that our cars have when we roll over a can. And that's the same impact a train can have. It's simply not a risk you want to take. If it's a tie at the crossing, unfortunately, you're going to lose. So please approach crossings looking and listening for that train. And if you see or hear one, please stop and wait. So this is another photo of a collision that happened. And as you can see, this was a tractor trailer, so it was a much heavier vehicle than the previous car. And then we have a freight train that is as well a heavier train. The devastation is very clear. We are always so very sad to see these incidents happen. And again, if you'll notice, way back to the left-hand side of the train, you can kind of make out a roadway. That train pushed that heavy truck that far in this incident. So we want to make sure, please, to use caution when you come up to the tracks. Now, in case there is an emergency at the railroad, we do want to make sure that the public is aware of what to do if you find yourself in that situation. And we call it find the blue and white to save your life. We do want you, if you are stuck or stalled, to get out of your vehicle immediately and get away, get every person in your car out and then away from the tracks. Whether you think a train is coming or not, you want to get away. If you do not hear or see a train, we want you to locate the blue and white sign and call the number that's on it and give them the DOT reference number for that crossing. That's the address for that crossing and no other crossing in the United States. So it's a very important sign to find. If for some reason that sign is not there, of course, always call 911. If the train is approaching, we want you to get out, of course, and we want you to run towards the train, but at a 45-degree angle away from the track itself. And of course, the reason for that is the debris field that would be on the other side of the vehicle where the train hits. So get out of the vehicle, get everyone out, have them run at a 45-degree angle towards the train, but away from those tracks. So this is what that blue and white sign looks like. The 1-800 number on this particular sign is just an example. It will be particular to each crossing, as that crossing DOT number will be as well. So find the blue and white to save your life. Now we want to make sure that everyone is aware that when you come up to a crossing, there are signs and signals that alert you to the fact that you are approaching a railroad crossing, and that is when you need to make sure that you are paying extra care and attention when you come up to the crossing to look and listen for that train whistle. If you have loud music, of course, these are the signs that indicate you need to turn that down and ask people to lower their voices in the vehicle so that you can hear a train approaching. So our passive signs that we have as you come up to a crossing, you're going to have your round yellow advanced warning sign that has the RR and the X. That means you are approaching a crossing. You also will have those pavement markings in the same shape painted on the roadway itself. It's also a no passing zone in this location, just as it would be at an intersection with a red light. You don't want to pass in this zone because you need to be thinking about the train that might be approaching and not whether you're passing a car or not. So then at the crossing itself, you will see the white bars that make an X that say railroad crossing. At this point, you are at the crossing, and there is a stop bar painted on the roadway itself. By law, you have to stop no closer than 15 and no further than 50 feet from the nearest rail. So don't go past that stop bar that you see painted on the roadway. That crossbuck sign is a regulatory sign. It is enforceable if you do not yield to the train. Of course, that is the least of your worries if a train is approaching. We just want to make sure people are aware that that sign is there and you should yield to the train if you see or hear one approaching. So always look in both directions and always expect a train. Now, the active warning devices that we have at crossings, we have bells and lights, as well as bells, lights, and gates. If those are activated, that means stop. It's the same as a stop sign or a stop light. The vehicular traffic, pedestrians, bicyclists have to stop and yield the way right away to the train. And of course, if the gates are down, driving around them is illegal. And here in South Carolina, if the gates are coming down or going up, you are supposed to stay stopped until they're all the way in the upright position and the lights have stopped. One of the reasons for that is, if you'll notice in this particular slide, it shows a 2 tracks sign. 2 tracks could mean 2 trains. So one train may be leaving and the gates are coming up, but it could be hiding another train that's in the distance, which will be coming shortly. And then the lights could activate again and the gates could begin coming down. So we want to make sure that you wait until those gates are all the way up and you can see clearly in both directions down all tracks to make sure no other train is approaching. I mentioned the campaign that we're working with outdoor enthusiasts, but we're also working with landscapers, construction workers, farming industry, that in certain situations when you're crossing, you may have limited space on the other side. You want to make sure that that storage space on the other side is big enough for your vehicle. And of course, you also want to make sure that if you see a humped crossing sign and you were driving a low boy or something that has low clearance, that you make sure you do not go across that track. You do not want to get yourself stuck on the rail itself with a low boy situation. So make sure if you don't fit, don't commit, don't start across those tracks. You also want to make sure that you're very clear of those once you get across the track. by at least 3 feet, but we're really saying 15 feet. We want to make sure that you are very clear of the track, that there's nothing that is actually on the rails itself. So if you're pulling a trailer with landscaping equipment or construction equipment or utility equipment, we want to make sure that drivers remember to get that vehicle all the way over, as well as whatever they're carrying, the trailer, as well as the materials that may be on that trailer. You have to make sure there's plenty of clearance on the other side. Of course, if you are working near the railroad tracks, we need you to call the railroad to inform them that you will be in the area. We want to make sure that everyone is doing their job safely. The railroad companies want to do their job safely. Engineers want to complete their jobs in a safe manner. And we know that those who work near railroad tracks do as well. So please, let's work together to inform the railroads that you will be in the area if you need to work near railroads. So some of our materials that we are putting out in this campaign, we also do have in Spanish. So if you need materials in Spanish, please let us know. We are trying to make sure that all people are aware that crossing railroad tracks with a trailer, you need to add that extra length before you are clear of the tracks. I mentioned earlier about the Outdoor Enthusiast campaign that we're running as well. And that too is reminding people to have plenty of clearance on the other side of the tracks. It is illegal, as I mentioned before, to be out on the railroads. It's private property. You don't want to use it as a shortcut to get to a location. But more importantly, it's very dangerous, and we want people to stay off those tracks. So if you want to join our team, we do have volunteers that take our message out to the public. We would love for you to join us. You can go to our website at www.oli.org to get information about that. At the very top, you would click that you want to be a volunteer. And that information would then be sent to me, and we could move forward with getting you to be a volunteer for our program. But we also have other volunteers that are able and willing to go out and talk to your location if you would like us to do so. One of the things that the pandemic did also do that is in a way a good thing, provided us with the opportunities to create more and more virtual materials. So we now have a library of wonderful virtual materials that I can send links to that you can use to share with all company employees if you would like to do so to share railroad safety. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to whoever's next. Great.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Janice. I mean, we all see railroad tracks every day. I mean, a lot of us, especially like you said, that live here in Columbia, but don't often think about, how dangerous it can be. I think I had mentioned that my dad he worked for the railroad for over 30 years, and he was always preaching and talking about railroad safety with me. So it was something that was always at the forefront of my mind, but someone that's not living it every day may not be thinking. So it's good to remind folks and say, you need to be thinking about this.
Absolutely. And we need to be good stewards for our children as well. My grandmother lived across from a railroad track, and when I was little, I remember playing on the tracks. I'm more than sure they told me not to do it, but children will be children, and I did it. So I should have gotten in trouble for that. So we need to remember that we need to be good examples for younger people, and when we're driving as well, of course, as when we're out recreating. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And we do have a question actually that has come in through the Q&A. Okay. From Carol. She says, Janice, what is the one message that you'd like for us to take away from this webinar today to stay safe? If you had to give one thing.
One quick thing for me would be to always expect a train. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. If you see a railroad crossing, always expect a train. Never assume it's not active. Always expect that train.
I think it's a good tip. That's a very good tip, especially if it would be a track that you would maybe you've never seen a train on it before, but at some point there's going to be a train that's on that track. So always expect that there's one there.
And the other thing about not seeing them very often, sometimes the opposite happens. And when you see them so many times, you become complacent and you may not even hear them anymore. You're sitting at home if one's near you and you hear it, and it just doesn't even phase you. And unfortunately, that can sometimes create an issue that you don't expect a train, you just hear it and you don't even notice it, and you drive in front of it. So we just always have to be mindful, always expect a train. And if we do that, then we can stop those track tragedies from happening.
Awesome. I think that is great advice. And so I'm actually going to share my screen again. Keep putting questions in the chat box if you have them, but we also have on the webinar today Jason Derrick, who actually reached out whenever he heard that we were doing this webinar and wanted to share his story. So I think that it would be great for him to be able to share his experience. And I'm going to now allow you, Derrick, to unmute, and you can go ahead.
All right, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right, very well, very well. And thank you all for hosting this, and thank you for putting all this together. And Miss Cowan, thank you as well. Everything you've mentioned is right on target with everything. And this topic is so easily glossed over, in my opinion. I too grew up in Chapin, really, probably about as close to the tracks as you can get. Yes, we played on the train tracks. If there was something we could put on the train tracks to mash or whatever, we did. And again, I know my parents were yelling, no, don't do that. But yeah, we know how it was. But living there and have lived there all my life, I did get complacent. I was very complacent. And, when the train doesn't wake you up at night because you're used to it, it's hard to hear it when you're driving. There's 2 crossings near our homes there, and both are not marked, just a simple stop sign. And the normal railroad warning sign. Visibility on both it's okay. It's not the greatest, but we are in rural America, and I didn't do a good job. I didn't really think about rail safety as my oldest daughter started driving. I didn't, tell her, hey, watch out for the train, because we live there. We see the train. I mean, it is a train. It's huge. How could you not see it? It has a very loud horn. How could you not hear it? So I didn't really stress on that as much as I did. Hey, don't be using your phone. Hey, don't be doing this or that. Just pay attention. She was very good about stopping. So, never really shared that to anybody, any of her friends, any of the people that came to visit us. You can come to my house from a couple different ways. You can cross tracks one way or come in from a different direction and not have to, but the most convenient way was right off of Highway 76 there and across the train tracks. And fast forward several years back several years now to November the 9th of 2019, my daughter had made some plans with her friends. They were all juniors in high school, made their plans. They were meeting on a Saturday morning early at my house, or they were actually, 2 of them were coming to pick her up, and they were going down to Soda City there on Main Street in Columbia. And they had, been shopping the day before, bought some new clothes. They were going to get them some fall pictures around the state capitol there or whatnot. But the driver that came, her friend, and they had all been friends since elementary school. Picked up the passenger. They lived in the same neighborhood, and they came to my house to pick up my daughter. I, again, didn't, you don't think about it. Hey, she's going to have a good time. They're responsible. I knew them. I knew their families, went to church together. Nothing you expect to happen. Not sure why, but the driver missed the easier crossing there at my parents' house and came in at the other crossing. And I know this because I was in my parents' yard with my dad standing in front of his shop. This was a Saturday morning about 9:30. We were out there just talking, looking at a few different things that we had planned to do that day. And I saw the car come in, and I knew who it was. And I thought it was strange, that she was coming in that way. But then again, I didn't know where she was coming from. Maybe she had came from a different direction than normal or whatnot, but really didn't think about it. And I remember hearing the train, and it was a cold morning, and you could hear the train forever. One of those days where the sounds just carries. And you're there talking, and again, that complacency comes in. It's a train. You hear them all the time. Knew they were picking up my daughter. I knew they were leaving. I did not know which way they would go. I would have went out probably the other way since they were going toward the interstate. But you eventually go the way or whatever way your GPS tells you. I'm not sure, but couldn't see the crossing from where I was in my dad's yard there. But they came back out that same way. 3 16-year-old girls just talking, chatting, having a great time, whatever. Clearly not paying attention, looking back. And they met at that intersection at the same time as a freight train that was headed, I guess you'd call it west. It was an empty freight train with the car carrier cars. I think there were two or either three locomotives. It was a pretty long train, but you could not time it any better if you tried to perfectly hit a vehicle in the driver's door. Train was traveling 42 miles an hour. And, I didn't see it. I heard the horn. I didn't see them going back out. But standing there talking to my dad, you heard this noise. And the closest thing I can take it to would be like you crushing an aluminum can, except the sound was magnified, a lot. Then you hear gravel, just gravel, and it sounds like, I don't know if you've ever been around a dump truck when they're unloading, a load of gravel, just that sliding noise, the gravel on the metal, you just hear a lot of that. Still didn't really know who it was, but how it takes a little bit for your brain to register, hey, what's going on? That's an accident or whatever. I ran up to the tracks there on the right of way as the train was still approaching me. Took a left from my dad's yard there to run down the side of the tracks, and that's when I saw the car, and it was a white car, and I knew at that point who it was. It was my daughter with her two friends, and it had pushed the car probably not as far as some of those in that presentation. Thankfully, it maybe rolled it off, and it went down an embankment there, probably 50 to 60 yards from the crossing, 100 at the most. But it was kind of upside down on the embankment. And I just remember running that way thinking, what am I going to do? This is the worst of the worst for a parent, for anybody. And I can also still remember looking up at the engineer, because he would have been on that side as the train was traveling west. And I can still see his face to the day, his look of just fear of what had happened. And he was standing up in his seat and had the window open, was trying to look back to see what was going on as he was, I'm sure, trying to get the train stopped. But yeah, no parent should have to see their kids like that. No one should have to see any kids like that, period. And I don't want to take up the whole time, but they all were unconscious then. Of course, I was selfish and helped out my daughter first. She came to, she doesn't remember any of this. As I was trying to break, I think her window was the only window that wasn't broke. And they make those windows pretty tough, because I finally ended up getting it broken and thankfully had a knife and cut her free from her seatbelt. And she told me what was hurting her, and she was very coherent. And I couldn't pull her out, but she helped me. She thought of enough to, hey, let's count. I'm going to push with my legs, and you pull. And by the time we're going through this, her other friend that was in the passenger seat, and thank God today that my daughter sat in the passenger seat on the back. Her other friend had come to and was screaming. And by then the train had stopped, and some people, the way the car ended up, you wouldn't know what was going on unless you actually saw it happen, because it was down an embankment. Anybody drove by on the other side where the road was would have, just assumed the train had stopped for some reason. But some people that saw it, thankfully, and had, again, risked their life to climb between those train cars and come over there and help. And, before long, there were lots of people, lots of first responders. The driver was hurt, had the most serious injuries. All three are survivors. I can't fathom that, other than the good Lord above performing a miracle. And from the amount of force the car took to push the side of a car in several feet, to push on the driver or something enough that it broke the console between the two front seats. Just the amount of force that's involved in that. And then for a human body to survive is simply amazing and a miracle. But looking back, could I have stopped it if I would have thought a couple seconds ahead and said, oh, they may come back out this way. Let me text them there's a train coming. Or even before that, by telling them, hey, this train is dangerous. This is dangerous. Make sure you stop. Make sure you are paying attention. And that's with any part of their driving. And that's one message out of this I would like to get across. This is, again, that complacent topic that it's easily glossed over. And being in the utility industry myself, working with a bunch of other guys, and you're thinking it's a train. How can you not see it? How can you not hear it? But yes, if you're not paying attention, I also learned through that process that there's a certain amount of information your brain can handle. Mine's probably a lot less than everyone else's, but when you're in the car and you're concentrating on a conversation with some other folks, your brain is concentrating on that conversation. And cars are built better and better as far as the sound, as sound insulation. How loud does that horn have to be before your brain is triggered to say, wait a minute, this is not just random noise that I'm trying to hear over. It's now a warning that something different is going on that I need to look at. Learned a lot about that, how cars are made and different things like that can affect all of that stuff. Main thing is just to stop, just to look, just to pay attention. Share that with your families. Don't gloss over it just because it is a train and it has a loud horn and anybody should be able to hear it. It happens. Ironically, about 2 weeks before the accident, I set up a safety meeting here at our co-op, and Ms. Cowan came out and shared information about that. And I shared some of my complacency with the group then, but to turn around about 3 weeks later, and here I am dealing with it again, because I didn't really say anything about it to my family or my coworkers or whatever. So we all owe it to ourselves Trains are an important part of our lives. They're everywhere, just like on that map you showed. They're all over our tiny little system right here in the Midlands. So not only, you know, crossing tracks safely with your normal vehicles or, you know, trailers with equipment, hauling poles, you know, even working in that right of way. Try to make sure you're sharing that message with your employees to be safe and take every precaution they can, and don't take for granted that you're going to hear it in enough time to get out of the way or do whatever you need to do. So hopefully I didn't take up too much time. Hopefully this message helps some people understand how important it is. And hopefully if anybody else doesn't take anything, at least take it back to your family and tell them, hey, this can happen. It does happen. And it's another one of those things that doesn't have to happen. So appreciate your time.
Thank you. We appreciate you, yeah, sharing your story. You know, we could talk about this all day in concept, but really hearing, you know, that, you know, it happens and it impacts people's lives, is they kind of drills that point home and you know, brings it closer to home for us. So we appreciate you sharing your story and your experience. And yeah, I feel like we need to have a video of you. Sadly we didn't get to see you, but yeah, I feel like now we need to have a video of you preaching the message. I mean, you're a really great spokesperson for that. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to end the webinar by just seeing if there were any other questions. We didn't have anything else come through the Q&A, but if you had those and we didn't answer anything, feel free to email our presenters, Tom or Janice, and then we'll definitely get back in touch with you to answer the questions. Like I said, we're going to be posting a recording of the webinar and the slides from the presentation. So we'll send those out afterwards. And I wanted to say thank you for attending. And I think we can end the webinar by saying always expect to train. Happy Rail Safety Week. Make sure to spread the message and stay safe around the tracks.